Long before the first Thunderbolt ever reached the skies of Europe, the United States had already made its decision. This war would not be fought halfway. It would be fought with factories running day and night, with engineers given freedom to think big, and with pilots trained not just to survive, but to dominate. America entered the conflict carrying the weight of an entire industrial civilization, confident that mass, power, and discipline would decide the future of the air war. By early 1943, that confidence was ready to take physical form. While Europe relied on refinement and tradition, the United States embraced scale and endurance. American designers did not ask how light a fighter could be. They asked how strong it could become without breaking. They did not chase elegance. They chased victory. The result was an aircraft that reflected the nation itself, large, unapologetic, and built to outlast anything placed in its path. On April 8, 1943, that philosophy climbed into the cold air above occupied France. At 27,000 feet, German pilots circled calmly, veterans hardened by years of uninterrupted combat. Below them, American P-47 Thunderbolts struggled upward, heavy and unfamiliar shapes against the bright sky. The Germans laughed openly. To them, these aircraft looked crude, oversized, and hopelessly unsuited for European air combat. The Thunderbolt did not resemble the fighters Germany respected. Its fuselage was thick and barrel-shaped. Its wings seemed too small for its weight. Its propeller dwarfed anything in the Luftwaffe inventory. German pilots, trained to value agility and climb rate above all else, saw only weakness. They believed they were watching inexperienced Americans bring the wrong machine to the wrong war. What they did not understand was that the Thunderbolt was not designed for their rules. It was built for American ones. At its heart was the Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp, an 18-cylinder engine capable of producing full power at altitudes where German engines gasped for air. A massive turbo supercharger fed it oxygen in the thin stratosphere, allowing it to fight comfortably where others faltered. The aircraft's weight, so ridiculed by its enemies, was deliberate. Armor protected the pilot. Thick metal surrounded vital systems. There was no fragile liquid cooling system to rupture with a single hit. The Thunderbolt could absorb punishment and keep flying because American engineers assumed their pilots would be hit and planned accordingly. Survival was not an accident. It was a requirement. In its wings sat 8 Browning .50 caliber machine guns, synchronized and electrically fed, each supplied with hundreds of rounds. This was not a fighter designed for brief, delicate engagements. It was built to deliver sustained, overwhelming fire. American doctrine assumed that when the guns fired, the target would cease to exist. Precision was important, but volume was decisive. Early combat seemed to confirm German confidence. In turning fights, the P-47 struggled. At low altitude, it climbed poorly compared to lighter fighters. Losses followed. American pilots paid in blood while learning what their aircraft could not do. But unlike their enemies, they were not bound by tradition. They studied the data, trusted their training, and adapted without hesitation. American pilots learned to fight vertically, not horizontally. They learned to trade altitude for speed and speed for life. From high above, Thunderbolts dove like falling steel, reaching velocities German fighters could not match or escape. Attacks were swift, violent, and decisive. The same mass that made the aircraft slow to climb gave it unstoppable momentum in a dive. German laughter faded into concern. Pilots began reporting aircraft that would not break apart, that continued flying despite heavy damage, that escaped dives no interceptor could follow. The Thunderbolt was no longer a joke. It was becoming a problem. And problems, in war, demand solutions. Those solutions failed when German pilots encountered American firepower head-on. When all 8 guns converged, the effect was immediate and catastrophic. Aircraft did not simply catch fire or lose control. They disintegrated. Structural members failed. Wings tore away. Pilots were given no warning and no chance to react. Even more disturbing was what happened after engagements ended. Thunderbolts returned to base riddled with holes, engines damaged, control surfaces shredded. Pilots climbed out, wounded but alive. Machines that should not have survived carried their men home anyway. Each return flight reinforced American confidence and quietly eroded German morale. By mid-1943, something fundamental had shifted. The Thunderbolt was no longer an experiment. It was a system supported by American logistics, American training pipelines, and American production lines that replaced losses faster than the enemy could comprehend. While German units counted aircraft, the United States counted output. As 1944 approached, the Thunderbolt's role expanded. Equipped with drop tanks, it escorted bombers deeper into enemy territory. When challenged, it crushed interceptors from above. When unopposed, it descended to the ground war, where its firepower proved just as devastating. Rail lines vanished, convoys burned, armor halted in place. Over Normandy, the sound of the P-47 became a signal of inevitability. Its heavy guns shredded vehicles. Rockets struck with artillery force. Bombs turned strongpoints into ruins. German troops learned that daylight movement meant destruction. The battlefield no longer belonged to maneuver or surprise. It belonged to American air power. By the time Allied forces pushed inland, the Luftwaffe was a shadow of itself. Fuel shortages grounded aircraft. Training collapsed. Veteran pilots were dead or captured. New pilots entered combat with almost no preparation, facing Americans who arrived with hundreds of hours of flight time and absolute confidence in their machine. The Thunderbolt had completed its transformation. Once mocked as too large, too slow, too American, it became the embodiment of American victory. It proved that wars of attrition favor nations that can build, train, and adapt faster than their enemies can endure. The P-47 did not rely on genius or luck. It relied on certainty. When the war ended, the record spoke clearly. The Thunderbolt had destroyed thousands of aircraft, vehicles, and trains. It had escorted bombers, supported invasions, and dominated skies across 2 continents. More importantly, it brought its pilots home at rates unmatched by any comparable aircraft. The P-47 Thunderbolt was not just a weapon, it was a statement. It declared that when the United States commits to war, it commits completely. With steel, with industry, with discipline, and with unshakable resolve. In the skies over Europe, thunder answered arrogance, and that thunder carried an American name. As the Thunderbolt asserted itself in the air, its deeper meaning became impossible to ignore. This aircraft was not the product of desperation or improvisation. It was the result of deliberate American planning, born from the understanding that modern war was industrial at its core. Victory would belong to the nation that could combine engineering, training, and production into a single, unstoppable force. And by 1944, that force was unmistakably American. German intelligence struggled to explain what they were facing. Reports contradicted expectations. Pilots described fighters that should have fallen but did not. Machines that absorbed punishment far beyond normal limits. What appeared inefficient on paper proved brutally effective in practice. The Thunderbolt refused to behave like a European fighter because it was never meant to. It was designed for a nation that fought wars on a continental scale. American pilots now trusted their aircraft completely. They knew its limits, and more importantly, its strengths. They climbed higher than their opponents, waited patiently, and attacked only when advantage was absolute. The Thunderbolt became a weapon of certainty. There was no gamble, no desperate maneuvering. Engagements were planned, executed, and ended on American terms. When German pilots attempted to flee, the Thunderbolt followed. Its dive speed exceeded anything they could manage without losing control. Escape became impossible. Attempts to turn were punished. Attempts to climb failed. Every response fed directly into the P-47's strengths. What once seemed like brute force revealed itself as tactical inevitability. The psychological impact grew quickly. German pilots began to fear the sight of thunderbolts above them, knowing what followed. The first pass was usually fatal. Survivors spoke of a wall of fire, a solid stream of bullets that left no gaps. Unlike cannon bursts, which came in brief flashes, American guns poured destruction continuously, denying even a moment to react. On the ground, the effect was equally severe. Supply columns learned to freeze at the sound of approaching engines. Rail traffic halted. Armor moved only at night, and even then cautiously. The Thunderbolt turned mobility into liability. Every road became a potential kill zone. Every daylight movement invited annihilation from above. By the summer of 1944, American air superiority was absolute. On D-Day, thunderbolts filled the sky from sea level to high altitude, denying German fighters any chance to intervene. Attempts to reach the beaches were shattered before they could form. The invasion unfolded under an umbrella of American power that could not be pierced or bypassed. In the weeks that followed, the Luftwaffe ceased to function as an effective force. Losses mounted faster than replacements could be trained. Fuel shortages worsened. Airfields lay in ruins. German pilots flew knowing the outcome was already decided. Against Thunderbolts, experience no longer guaranteed survival. The Thunderbolt's success was inseparable from American production. While Germany rationed resources, the United States expanded output. Factories delivered aircraft faster than squadrons could lose them. Ground crews replaced damaged machines overnight. Pilots stepped into new cockpits without hesitation, knowing identical aircraft waited behind them. This industrial rhythm broke the enemy's ability to recover. Each American loss was temporary. Each German loss was permanent. The imbalance grew with every mission. War became mathematics, and the numbers favored the United States beyond dispute. As the conflict neared its end, even Germany's most advanced aircraft could not reverse the tide. Jets appeared, faster but fragile, forced into predictable patterns during takeoff and landing. Thunderbolts adapted again, diving from altitude to strike when opportunity appeared. Speed alone could not overcome American firepower and coordination. When peace finally came, the verdict was clear. The P-47 Thunderbolt had reshaped aerial warfare. It proved that strength, protection, and sustained fire mattered more than elegance. It validated an American philosophy that valued survivability and overwhelming force over tradition. The Thunderbolt left behind more than wreckage. It left a lesson written across the skies of Europe and the Pacific. Wars are not won by machines alone, but by the systems that build them, the people who fly them, and the nation that stands behind them without hesitation. In the end, the P-47 stood as a monument to American resolve. It entered combat, mocked and misunderstood. It ended the war feared and respected. The thunder it carried silenced an empire in the air and announced a new reality to the world. When America fights, the outcome is not a question. It is a conclusion written in steel, fire, and unyielding confidence. As American forces pushed deeper into Europe, the Thunderbolt's presence became routine, and that routine itself was devastating. What had once been extraordinary firepower turned into a daily certainty for the enemy. Every morning, American pilots took off knowing they owned the sky. They did not hope for air superiority. They assumed it because it had been earned through relentless pressure and overwhelming capacity. The Thunderbolt proved especially decisive in its role as a fighter bomber. Its rugged construction allowed it to fly low, absorb ground fire, and return again and again. Pilots attacked bridges, supply depots, troop concentrations, and armored columns with precision, learned through constant combat. Each sortie reduced Germany's ability to maneuver, reinforcing the slow collapse of its defensive lines. German commanders quickly understood the pattern. Units that attempted daylight movement were destroyed. Communications broke down as roads became death traps. Even when tanks remained operational, fuel shortages and air attacks rendered them strategically useless. The Thunderbolt did not need to destroy everything. It only needed to make movement impossible. American pilots described their missions with calm professionalism. There was pride, but little surprise. Their aircraft did what it was built to do. Ground crews kept them flying. Engineers refined weapons and tactics based on real-time feedback. This loop of adaptation gave the United States a crushing advantage, one Germany could not replicate under constant bombardment. By late 1944, the Thunderbolt's reputation was absolute. German troops recognized its silhouette instantly. The sound of its engine alone triggered panic. Veterans warned replacements to scatter, to hide, to freeze. Nothing else produced the same reaction. Air power had become psychological warfare, and the Thunderbolt was its most visible instrument. Even in the Ardennes, where weather grounded much of the air war, the moment skies cleared, American Thunderbolts returned. German advances slowed, then stopped. Columns burned. Momentum vanished. The battle's outcome was sealed not by a single strike, but by the certainty that American air power would always return. As the war reached its final months, Thunderbolts ranged freely over Germany itself. Factories, rail yards, and infrastructure collapsed under sustained attack. The Luftwaffe could no longer respond. Fuel, pilots, and aircraft were gone. What remained was endurance on one side and exhaustion on the other. When victory arrived, the Thunderbolt's record spoke without exaggeration. Thousands of enemy aircraft destroyed, tens of thousands of vehicles eliminated, countless pilots brought home alive. It was not the fastest fighter, nor the most elegant. It was the most reliable expression of American warfare. Decisive, adaptable, and relentless. The P-47 Thunderbolt did not symbolize desperation or survival. It symbolized dominance. It reflected a nation that trusted its people, empowered its industry, and refused to accept limits imposed by others. In the skies of Europe, it delivered a final lesson that echoed long after the guns fell silent. The war proved that American strength was not accidental. It was constructed deliberately, maintained relentlessly, and applied without hesitation. The Thunderbolt was one machine among many, but it carried the weight of an entire system behind it. And that system ensured that when America rose into the sky, it did not merely fight. It prevailed,